The narrative of Devil May Cry 3 takes a surprising twist in the midst of the game. Arkham, a man who killed his wife to become a demon, appears to have been a pawn of Virgil's, a man misled by power. He has many faces, appearing before Dante as a demonic clown, seemingly harmless, before Mary as a repentant sinner faking his death, before Virgil as a man hungry for power, yet missing his daughter, and allows himself to be murdered by his partner. Yet all these faces are lies, used to mislead the cast into a trap. Appearances are not what they seem in Devil May Cry 3. A staircase that appears sturdy falls beneath Dante's feet. Statues in one hallway become dangerous monsters in another. Later, the entire layout of the tower changes, with doors leading to new, seemingly impossible locations. Up is down, right is left. The world is not what it appears to be. Reality is not real. Everything is made of illusions and dreams. This is a world built upon the ideals of Vajrayana Buddhism, the esoteric traditions of Buddhist thought. The beliefs, the symbols, and the ideals of these ancient schools of thought are found throughout Temen Nigru and the plot of DMC3, and these themes create a story with far more depth than is immediately clear, and it begins with the realization that reality is empty. The general teachings of Buddhism are very accessible. Life is suffering, and to cease suffering, you must cease feeling desire. It's not a completely accurate summation of the core concept. Essentially, Buddhism teaches that wanting things we cannot have is the source of all strife and suffering. Controlling our desires leads to the end of suffering and ultimately spiritual peace. This is universal to Buddhist traditions around the world. Vajrayana Buddhism, however, has its own unique interpretations of Buddhist tradition, which make their way into DMC3. We know for certain it is this strand of Buddhist thought being referenced in the game. After all, it is the Vajra, the symbol of this tradition, which is an item in the game called the Vajra. The Vajra is an object with roots in the Hindu tradition, which has become the symbol and namesake for Vajrayana Buddhism. Originally, it was the tool of Indra, god of storms, representing lightning which could strike at any moment from the sky. It can also mean diamond, referring to something natural and indestructible. A sudden, unstoppable force, the hardest material in the world, completely unbreakable. Nothing better represents the concept of power in every manifestation than the Vajra. The Vajrayana schools of Buddhism are so named because their focus is upon the esoteric traditions, the fastest and most difficult paths to enlightenment. The tradition is centered upon Yidam, deity yoga. The meditator visualizes themselves as a deity, a Buddha, or a Bodhisattva, as a divine being, already purified and enlightened. The end goal is presented as reality now, because if it will be true, then it is true. If you will be enlightened, then you already are. The possibility already exists within you. Atop the Temen Nigru, Dante awakens to his full power as a demon. But the possibility of that awakening is not something that was created at that moment. It always existed. Dante's demonic self could have awoken at any time. In the same way, deity yoga presents the meditator as an already awakened deity, bringing the visualization to reality by presenting it as already real. When your mind believes it, you work towards making it reality, then it becomes real. You become a Buddha in this life. A facet of esoteric Buddhism is sunyata, a Sanskrit term that is often translated as emptiness. Everything is made of something else. Nothing in reality is inherently real on its own, so nothing really exists. In this interpretation, existence is taken to mean something eternal, something that never changes, something that's always the same, and there is no such thing. Everything is susceptible to age and decay. Everything is susceptible to interpretation and differing viewpoints, and so nothing in reality is actually real. It is all ephemeral, all just a passing daydream. The source of all our woes and all our worries is this, that we take what we see as reality. Our house looks solid and permanent, so we are surprised when it suddenly burns down. It didn't seem possible, yet it always was. Everything is subject to change. This goes even further to our sense of identity, of self. Our perceptions of reality make us believe in the existence of what is called subject and object, that there is an I and a you, that I am a thing that exists, and you are a thing that exists outside me, opposing me. The subject versus object view of the world is the source of all conflict. Once there is an I, there is possession, there's selfishness, envy, anger. It is only by recognizing that there is no such thing as I, that no matter how you search the world, you cannot find a definite existence called myself. When you realize that I and you are the same, that is when selfishness evaporates. Devil May Cry 3 presents us with two characters who are quite literally the same, genetically and visually. They are twins, and yet they act as if they are alien to one another, as if Dante and Virgil are opposing forces in the universe. This is the source of all their problems, their vehement anger at one another. Virgil acts selfishly, caring only for himself. This leads to his own downfall. He is tricked by illusions, betrayed by others, trapped by his own emotions and his pride. His sense of self leads him astray. Dante is the polar opposite, one who does not care, seemingly, for anything. His journey leads him to recognize in himself a desire to care. As he ascends the tower, he ascends spiritually. Through meeting Lady, seeing what Arkham and Virgil's plan will lead to, he begins to fight to protect others. It is after this game that the rest of the series happens, and we see a Dante who goes out of his way to save others, even his enemies. It is through the trials of Temen Nigru, the spiritual ascension that he survives, that makes him the hero of the DMC series. The first set of challenges Dante faces is focused upon 4 doors. These trials simulate 4 of the 5 celestial Buddhas of esoteric tradition, as each is associated with an element and color of the celestial mandala. First, the blue door, which is entered right after you fight Cerberus, a monster frozen in ice, representing water. Then there is the green door, representing wind, which leads to the yellow door, representing earth, behind which you fight a giant bug that burrows through the ground. The last is the red door, which is quite literally on fire. Throughout this section, the player fights Cerberus, Agni and Rudra, and the Gigapede, each associated with an element. Altogether, this area represents the 4 cardinal directions, the 4 colors, the 4 elements, and 4 of the 5 major Buddha families. It is also during this portion of gameplay that Dante obtains the Vajra. Using it reveals the soul of steel. Dante obtains a soul that is unbreakable, just as the practitioner of Vajrayana Buddhism obtains a Vajra soul. This soul is what lets Dante defy what appears real. The area below this bridge is called the Chamber of Sins in English. In Japanese, it is called Shinen Naru Naraku no Ma. Shinen Naru means profound, deep, or unfathomable, and Naraku is a term for hell that specifically relates to Buddhist concepts. The phrase no Ma is found throughout locations in Temen Nigru. Nearly half the areas of the tower have titles that end in no Ma. It is a term that means something akin to between or in between, but it is also an aesthetic in Japanese art. Ma on its own is a term that means a gap or space, an emptiness between something and something else. In Japanese art, the emptiness is just as valued and important as things that are present. In the West, it's referred to as negative space, and the Tower of Temen Nigru seems to be full of it. The names for the rooms in this tower focus on the elements of emptiness, on what is between here and there, a very Japanese and very Buddhist way of looking at the world. Having unlocked the final door, Dante is able to face his brother. Ultimately, he is defeated here and even appears to die, but this death is merely a rebirth. It is an awakening in which his true self, his dormant power, rises to the surface through the instruction of Virgil, who in this metaphor works something like Dante's guru. In Tibetan Vajrayana Buddhism especially, the relationship between a student and a guru is considered essential for the passing of knowledge and the attainment of enlightenment. Certain forms of meditation in this tradition focus upon the sense of death, of absorption into the clear light as a method of reaching enlightenment. You prepare for the experience of death by mimicking the experience in meditation, and thus experience rebirth as an enlightened being. Dante experiences a similar kind of rebirth, through an actual physical death at the height of his journey, at the hands of his own other self, his twin brother. From this point, the journey reverses into a descent into the underworld. Dante descends into an area underground, navigating lakes and sunken opera houses, in a section of game that draws more on other traditions. But the story circles back around. The ultimate chapters of the game and the final symbols of the story return to Vajrayana traditions. To open the door that leads to the second fight with Virgil, Dante must obtain 2 items, a golden sun and an onyx moon shard. These are hidden in 2 separate locations. The moon shard is found in a room that in Japanese is called Between the Sinful Prisoners, once again referring to a hell-like place. The sun, however, comes from a room with a specific Buddhist term in its name. This symbol is the Japanese for a Buddhist concept. It literally means to cover or a veil. This is the desire to cover or conceal your sins in order to avoid punishment or loss. The sun, which in Buddhism represents luminosity of mind, is found in this room, a symbolic representation of the light that dispels the veil and reveals everything. In Vajrayana Buddhism, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas often appear in art alongside what are called sun and moon discs. These objects represent elements of enlightenment and the Buddha's accomplishments. The sun is luminosity and light, the light that dispels the darkness of confusion. The moon is the impartial compassion that cools the heat of suffering. These 2 together represent the union of upaya and prajna, or wisdom and skill. And in the game, using both together allows Dante to face Virgil once again. In Vajrayana Buddhism, it is the union of wisdom and skill that leads to enlightenment. Darkness and light are major visual themes of this game. Multiple locations are centered around the ability or inability to see. The doppelganger boss fight centers upon shedding light on the darkness in order to dispel your false half. Light in Buddhism is enlightenment. It is truth. It is the realization of the nature of the world. Darkness is confusion, falsehood, the path to rebirth in hell, and the continuation of the cycle. In the final levels of the game, Dante explores the demon world for the first time, entering a series of locations named after the Buddhist concept of nirvana. It's a somewhat misleading translation. Likely, the word was chosen because it's the most recognizable Buddhist term to a Western audience. The term used in the Japanese version is Mingfu, a Chinese term for hell. One of these hells, the Infinity Nirvana, is called Owari Naki Mugen no Mefu. The word Mugen is part of the Japanese name for the lowest circle of Buddhist hell, the Avicii Hell, or Mugen Jikoku. This is the worst hell to be reborn in, and one in which those who have murdered their parents or harmed a Buddha is born into. In Buddhist tradition, there are many hells. but they are divided into two types, the cold hells and the hot hells, and which hell you go to is dependent upon the sins you have committed. Having a cold heart or being uncaring will lead to the cold hells. Being too hot-headed, passionate, or violent will lead to the hot hells. The hell section of the game is built upon Buddhist visual cues and ideas. The game loop is a circle, a trap the player is caught in. Only by breaking the cycle can Dante be free, a metaphor for the concept of samsara, the Buddhist idea of reincarnation. Human beings are forever caught in a cycle of life, death, and rebirth. In order to break it, Dante must see through the illusions present in the cycle. Lastly, he must obtain the samsara, named for the cycle of rebirth. The appearance of the object is very similar to a variation on the Vajra, the Vishva Vajra, from the Sanskrit Vishva for world. It means the world as we experience it. It is an emblem of protection, stability, foundation, of reality as it is, not as it appears to be. It is the final object that allows Dante to enter the deepest pits of hell. The final confrontation with Virgil shows us a very different Dante. He's no longer fighting out of anger at his brother. He's fighting to stop him from harming himself and others. Virgil's already shown he's not using his power responsibly. Dante doesn't trust him with Spartas. Virgil is still on the selfish, deluded path, and he cannot see that what he has always wanted, the power to protect himself and his loved ones, is right before him. He does not see that the very thing he wanted to have the power to protect is the person he's fighting right now, the person he almost killed. Virgil is so lost in delusion that he has turned his reason for fighting around on itself. Virgil loses, but he is still trapped in his delusions and cannot let go of his pride. Just as he struck Dante and pushed him away on the top of the tower, leaving him for dead after cutting his palm, Virgil once again cuts Dante's palm to keep him at bay. There are some differences, however. We see that Virgil encourages Dante to leave before the door to hell closes. He pushes Dante away to keep him from following him into the abyss. While he is incapable of letting go of his pride and embracing the human world, he is no longer quite so distanced from his brother, and he cares about Dante's fate. It is not quite enough to save him, however. Dante's Buddhist journey has ended with the tragic realization that nothing is permanent, that life is suffering, and there will always be loss. And yet, he continues to fight on, learning to defend others, to try and lessen the suffering in the world, something like a bodhisattva of demons. Virgil's enlightenment is only just beginning. After selfishly raising Temenigru and taking countless lives, he will have to pay for his karma in hell. That happens quite literally in his case. He is tortured by Mundus, imprisoned, and loses his identity, suffering for at least a decade before he's set free. We then see him attempt to kill himself, an act that is also a form of harm and a crime in Buddhist eyes. A new self is born, a temporary self, V, who only exists for 45 days in DMC. It's a very specific time frame. In Buddhist tradition, the span of time between your death and your next rebirth is 49 days or less, and in Tibetan is called the bardo. It's a kind of half-life, a semi-conscious state of transition between lives. V is that existence for Virgil, who finds himself reborn and in essence enlightened, having now learned through his suffering in hell and his existence as V, the lesson his brother learned decades ago. The world is suffering. Attachment is suffering. Selfishness is suffering. It is only by letting go of selfishness that suffering can come to an end. And by being selfless, by leaping into hell to save Redgrave and Nero, Virgil and Dante both reveal the divinity they've come to embody, the Buddhas they've become.